Hello, my fellow Dreadites. Welcome to the Dread Alert podcast. Today, we are joined by writer, director, producer of the upcoming film Dorothea, Chad Ferrin. Now, I've seen Dorothea, and if you like true crime and if you like horror with a touch of comedy, Dorothea is going to be a film you want to check out as soon as it releases on November 4th. Chad, thank you so much for joining us. I absolutely loved the film.
Wow. Well, thank you for having me, and I'm glad you liked the film.
Yeah, I thought it had a very distinct visual style from some interesting, like, foreground shots with some action in the background out of focus. I think I might have caught a diopter shot in there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yes.
I was like, and I'm a sucker for 80s film, and diopter shots are like my catnip. So I was just like, this film is fantastic. And it also features a really cool score from Richard Band. So if you're a fan of Re-Animator and From Beyond and some of the like most iconic 80s music, I could just rave about this film. I really enjoyed it.
Wow.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So I have to ask, you're the writer, director, producer of this film. What is your process like on adapting a true crime story into something of a more compelling horror narrative? This isn't your first rodeo. You've also done Ed Kemper. So do you have a process that's kind of like shaped over time?
No, it just if an idea or a character or in this case, Dorothea, sparks my interest or whatever, I dive in to learn as much factual things behind them, and then just kind of let the writing begin. And if I'm excited by the character or whatever, it kind of just makes it easier and it pulls me into it. And usually a script takes me 2 weeks to write, and it just, I have a certain amount of energy and excitement that I know will dissipate the longer it takes. So I try to get it all done as fast as possible, because then I'm on to the next project and the next project and the next project. And Dorothea was just, an inspiration from, Robert Aldrich of, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte or Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I mean, mixed in with, Goodfellas. There was kind of, the breaking the fourth wall and all these other split diopter shots, things that were more kind of, stylish and, exciting. And, it just kind of that pulled it in from the script, making the script even more fun to write, because you were able to go into these different directions and have narration and have, all these kind of, split screen and all these things that were not your typical devices for a normal narrative. It was just kind of a free for all and fun to try with doing something different, as opposed to Ed Kemper, which was a little more straight line. This was more fun in a way, and having the comedic elements and those kind of things tossed in there, because what she was doing was just a lot of times hilarious. I mean, someone that is this elderly woman who's poisoning people, burying them in her backyard, scamming their soul. It's just such a colorful character, as dark and morbid as she was, but at the same time fun to kind of dive into.
Yeah, I was really struck with the tone of the film and also the execution. I thought the direct address to camera was really unique, and it did feel Goodfellas-esque. When I was crafting a question that I'm going to ask later about your favorite true crime or your favorite like character study film, I almost wrote police procedural, but I'm like, that's not right. What am I looking for? And it's that Goodfellas vibe.
Sure.
But I'm curious because Dorothea is such a character, and definitely supports this film. How did you balance telling her story I mean, it's absurd in some ways, but it's true, but how did you balance that with the respect for her victims? It's very, you're walking a very fine tightrope of a comedy, but
Right.
also real lives are at stake. I wonder if you had, if there was any thought given to that, because it's very funny, but I also found it very respectful to the actual events.
Yeah, well, in any of these, I try to at least write victims or, the killer or any of these things that not that they're bumbling idiots, they're real people in this case that had, this happened to them. So you try to, not write them as bumbling fools or, as fodder for the killer. It was, they had troubles. They were living in this house, trying to get over their addictions. And she, was, a predator, and, you know, just kind of, everything about her was meticulously planned, their demise, and then their burial, and then their stealing of their checks. So she was a smart cookie. There's no denying that. And so if you fell under her web, so to speak, you were kind of in trouble. And it was kind of going in that without. It's always a hard thing when victims or and their families. You know, if it's hard for you're going to get backlash from one side or the other in some way, shape, or form. So, but you try to be as respectful as you can and still make something that's entertaining and, thought provoking and whatever. And that's kind of what I try to do. But at the same time, try to have respect, because actual people did die, and you just got to do what you feel comfortable with. I mean, there's some people are going to love it, some people are going to hate it, but for me, it's also, I have to be entertained by it, I have to be enthralled by it, I have to be excited by it. So it's kind of trying to just stay true to who I am and what entertains me. And if someone comes and horribly murders me and someone writes a script about it, I'm not going to be upset. You have my blessing to write me bumbling or whatever it might be. I won't be upset by it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think that, you made a really great point about Dorothea being so calculating and so meticulous. She feels like the absolute epitome of an organized sociopath.
Yes.
It's wild to see how precise she is. Um, what are your influences approaching this as a director? We talked a little bit about the writing, but as a director, did you have any strong visual influences? Anyone you look to say, this is the language we're going to use on this film? Because it is a very unique, strongly voiced film.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to Goodfellas was the biggest inspiration, is not only in the writing of that, where breaking the fourth wall and these different things, but you know the way the camera works in that film is just spectacular. And it's just I tell my DP Jeff Billings, I'm like, here's some films that I like, that I'm inspired, whether it's a little bit of De Palma, or like I said, Robert Aldrich, or whatever it is, and I throw a slew of films, Fat City, or by John Huston, and you kind of throw a whole bunch of films his way, and I say, here's what is inspiring me at this moment visually. And it's a lot of the stuff I also write into the script, whether it's a camera move or the split diopter shot or whatever it might be. So I kind of know when I get there, with the idea of I want for that particular scene. But a lot of the time I kind of just go by not only the rehearsal, what the actors bring to it, but also the location itself. Because a lot of times on these low budget things, you've got 10 hours to get 10 pages done. So you've got to kind of get run and gun mentality and get what you got. And if you go in there with all these storyboards and all these ideas in your head, and you're like, oh, we're out of time to do all that, we just got to do this. So I'm very free flowing when it comes to a style for each particular film, and it's just kind of going as far as shots go and whatever, what we're able to achieve. If one thing's written out, we've got a crane shot here where it comes down, you stick to that because it's in the script and it worked for what we have. But a lot of the times there's just no time to get the wild ideas that you might have in your head, or a way to do it. And you're just kind of like, okay, we block it out in a master shot, then we go in for close-ups, and then we see what works in between that. And if we have time to get a nice dolly move in, we throw that in there and try it. But nothing for me is ever locked solid, because everything is always changing, whether it's an actor's performance or the location is the size of a closet, and in your mind it was a ballroom. So I'm just kind of open. Instead of pulling my hair out, I just kind of go, okay, this is what it is. How can we make this work and give the film, a feel that's bigger than it is? And that's what I try to do with every film. You make these in 10 days on a limited budget, and you just try to do the best you can.
I'm shocked to hear that this was made so quickly. I'm shocked to hear it was written in 2 weeks, because everything felt extremely specific and extremely fine-tuned with this. But I will say a lot of my favorite films have that run and gun ethos, and
Yeah.
it there's a certain heart to the film that happens when people are working together, wearing many hats, and just making the art happen. And I always, my audience is probably sick of hearing me talk about it, but it's like David Lynch's Room to Dream, like being
Mm-hmm.
inspired by the location, being inspired by the performance. Some of the
Totally,
best
totally,
art happens that way.
totally.
Yeah. One thing that really elevates this film, and again, I'm shocked to hear that it was made so quickly, but one thing that really elevates the film is the score, and it spans so many genres, and it has its bones in some of the scores that I love from the 80s, like I mentioned earlier. What's it like working with Richard Band? I had a chance to meet him this weekend. He spoke so highly of you, and he said that you've worked together on a number of projects. What's that collaboration like?
Oh, I mean, Richard is, phenomenal. And he, again, elevates the film up, 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 up. It just brings something no other composer I've ever worked with can bring to it. And, he's just not only a wealth of cinema information, he comes from a family. His father was a famous producer, and so he's got and his brother is, of course, Charlie Band, who's got Full Moon Studios. I mean, it's just amazing, just the history around Richard, and his talent as a composer is unmatched. I mean, I bless the stars that I've managed to work with him on numerous films, and every time we do it, it's just a joy. I'll send him the script sometimes. He'll read that and have some notes, some suggestions. It's say if he's interested or not from that stage, and then after he'll come down to a set visit or two and meet the cast and crew if he's on board. Then I send him a rough cut. He'll make some notes, and then when I lock picture, he'll take it. And a couple of weeks later, he's like, "Here, come on over. I got some stuff for you to listen to." So, it's just kind of one of those things where when it's in his hands, I feel safe because it's going to be a great score, and it's going to get done fast, and it's going to be good, and it's just a pleasure to work with him.
I can say there was some wild stuff happening from the normal like strings that you would expect from a Richard Band score to these walking bass lines that I was like, was that Twin Peaks almost? Like I was like, oh, that was. I mean, it was. He nailed this film. There's so much intrigue and so much like I don't know. I heard some horns in there at one point. It was
Sure.
fantastic.
It was funny because I normally when I edit, I put in temp score, and for this film, the entire temp score was different Ennio Morricone songs from different films, from different tracks, but it fit it so well. And normally Richard will hear the stuff and he's like, take that temp stuff out. I don't want to hear any of it. But for this one, he's like, you actually picked stuff that fits it so well that that I'm totally inspired by some of these, Morricone tracks. And, and it showed. There's some spots that you're like, especially when they're down by the river, taking the coffin to the river, it's got this
Yes.
womp, 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 which is very
Yes.
Morricone and so great.
Oh yeah. No, it was. It was appropriately genre spanning, if that makes sense. It was appropriately like across the board. It was just so well done. I have so many good things to say about this film. It's a challenge for me to not gush and to solicit answers from you because I could just tell you what I thought of it. Um, but I'm curious, where do you see the overlap? Because there's two distinct audiences you're serving with this. You have your true crime audience and your horror audience. And I probably Richard will be like, this weird guy talked to me about this at the Comic-Con. But where do you see that overlap happening? Are you intentionally servicing both audiences? Are you servicing one more than the other? Where are you coming from as a director?
Well, for that, you really try to service all, and walk the line of, you want to be truthful to what happened and get all that in, but at the same time you want to be cinematic, and at the same time you want to kind of tell the story as closely as possible to what happened. And I try to do that, and it goes down to researching everything that I can on her, and then pulling from that what works, and then little nuggets of what might be far-fetched of what happened. You kind of just make it work, but once you kind of have her character down and you think, well, she probably would have done this if that were the thing, the scene with the boat salesman, I mean, with Lou Temple is a perfect example of exaggerating what is taking it out. The fact that putting the coffin in the river, that's true. The guy she hired to help build the coffin, all that's true aspects of it, but then just kind of expanding on that makes it more, for me, entertaining and exciting and something to do. Her speaking Spanish, weaving in these different things that she did with scenes and stuff that are exciting to me and hopefully entertaining to an audience.
And Lou Temple was fantastic. That scene is a standout scene for me. And
Right.
the supporting cast is fantastic in this. But I wonder, is it challenging writing a protagonist who's also a villain? She's clearly the main villain of the piece, but also you can't call her the antagonist because she's also the protagonist of the piece.
Right,
Is that a
right.
challenge for you to make her relatable and likable and charming while also heinous?
Well, I think that's the thing. We had a screening at the Valley Film Festival that was actually a packed screening, and everyone just loved it. It was one of the best screenings of my career for any of my films, and everyone was rooting for her. And in a sense, they kind of felt bad because when after you stop away from it, and you take a step back, you're like, oh wait, this was a true woman. This is whatever. But I'm rooting for her like she's the hero, and I think it's painting some of the stuff that happened to her. She had a rough life, that led to certain things. And so if you weave those things in with the heinous things and you kind of like, you weigh it on a scale of, well, I can kind of justify something, so it's not like a completely, like Charles Manson or Ted Bundy, who's, or Richard Ramirez, who are evil from the get-go, and that there's nothing redeeming at all. I think there were certain things that people can relate to with her, and kind of take that one. Whereas a Richard Ramirez, it's hard to relate anything
Yeah.
aspect in his life except maybe his love for Dark Shadows or horror films or whatever. Other than that, or ACDC, other than that, he's a very hard character. I wrote a script, and we're doing that film next on Ramirez, and that was one of the hardest scripts I ever wrote. So this one was definitely an easier, I don't want to say family friendly film, but more accessible to people than say the Night Stalker, which is very it's a tough film.
Yeah, those are some dark crimes. And
Right.
yeah, I wouldn't say this is family friendly, but I will say that it is very much so an approachable horror film while still being distinctly horror, and it was really
Sure.
a really nice balance. Um, are there any, and there are some really great practical effects in this. I think early on there's a bathtub scene. Please keep your eyes peeled for that. That effect is just gnarly and cool. But I wonder if there are any other effects in the movies that you were really like, wow, we nailed this. We really got this done.
Oh well, Joe Castro, who I've worked with on numerous films, and he's just a joy to. He pulls this stuff off every time, and it's always a pleasure to work with him. I'm trying, the head in the bathtub is my favorite, and so it, anything and everything he does is great. I mean, I can't really pick one or the other, but on this one, I would say definitely the bathtub is probably my favorite of his that pulled off.
You linger on that shot for an uncomfortably long period of time, and it works so well. I was like, oh, that's so gnarly, and it looks real, and it was very unnerving. It was great. Um, Along those same lines, are there any sequences that you feel like, wow, we really knocked this sequence out of the park? This is like, or maybe like a favorite shot that you did in the film.
Well, the split diopter shot is one of my favorites. Ezra
Okay.
Buzzington as Chief is great. The burial scene of him was great. I mean, it's one of those things
Yeah.
where when we were shooting it, it comes back where I'm like, is it okay to get some dirt on you? I mean, and bury you, alive, and the act. Well, for you, okay. So once you know, I'm shoveling the dirt on him. I'm like trying, getting in his face because I knew we only had numerous. Once his face was covered and it gets in his mouth, he's going to jump up and scream. But he took it and was fine with it and waited till cut, and it was great. And the scene, you really feel bad for him. I mean, those. Him talking about his mother and my, she used to call me my boy. I mean, those things to me are like, that's messed up. And for me, I can totally relate to that. My mother had a nickname
Hmm.
for me. So working in things like that for his character and building it more than just some random victim that might have been, there's something to him. He was a character that was a real character who did end up digging graves for her unbeknownst to what he was doing, and then ended up in the grave. So, I mean, those things, you know, going back to the victims, for me, it's finding, especially once the role is cast and the actor, he's into it and whatever, and then getting you feel for him and what his demise, and that to me is the ultimate thing for a victim, whether or not, if you're going to, as an audience member, you're feeling bad that that person is getting killed, is
Yeah.
my way of
Yeah. It was.
justifying, I guess, for doing something that might be considered in some people's mind wrong, objectionable to do it.
Yeah.
Some people, might think all true crime shouldn't be made at all because it's against the victims. So, to pick out one victim or story because it's more recent than, Ted Bundy or whatever it might be, there's no justification. It's either all okay or none of it's okay.
Yeah, I think you're probably onto something with that. It's it serves as a cautionary tale in some ways too. You can't turn a blind eye to true crime stories. We need to be aware that these things are happening, and story is one of the oldest forms of art. This is how we communicate these things.
Yeah.
And that my boy was so humanizing. I was like, oh no. And I was like, please don't be lie. And then you just zoom in on that can. I was like, son of a bitch. Talking about the themes and humanizing, this is a story, at least from where I sit, about survival at all costs. And it's a story about, as you so succinctly put it at the end of the film, doing things on your terms, doing things your way. Um, is there something outside of being an interesting character study that you'd like the audience to take away from this film?
I think it's just, no matter how heinous she was or is, I mean, she overcame uh, obstacles, a messed up family, a messed up childhood, messed up marriages, messed up whatever, and learned a way to, kind of scam the government, get all, all these things, kill people, get away with it. It's something that's, I don't want to say admirable, but yeah, it's admirable. Any of these things, as heinous as something is, if you take a step back and go, well, if she didn't do these negative things and put that toward positive, imagine the stuff she could have done if she ran a business or what. There's certain things that you can kind of take away from people's mistakes and go,
Mm.
well, if they would have done it this way or that way. And I try to think of my own life in that same way. Instead of taking, if you were, arrested or whatever, as a teenager, I was into check forgery. And I did all this stuff and whatever, and then I got caught, and then I spent 3 months in jail, and I quickly learned not to break the law anymore, and I learned my lesson at it. Whereas some people like Dorothea didn't learn and took it even a step further, murdering people. And you kind of think, well, what caused that? Was it in the brain? And you start thinking about what it is, but at least you're thinking about it. And as an audience member, whether you love the film or hate the film, you think about it and you go, well, that's an interesting character. And then you research her and you find out more about her, and you're like, well, at least they got that right. But it brings your interest to certain things, whether it's, Dorothea reading Edgar Allan Poe or taking a riff off that. And then you're like, well, Edgar Allan Poe, that's interesting that, now I'm interested in that poem. And it brings you on to other things, not just a movie, a true crime film or a
Mm.
horror movie. It's got different layers to it that you hope the audience will find entertaining, interesting, and at least love it or hate it, you'll find certain things that you're like, oh, that was interesting, and now I'm interested in learning more about that. You know.
Yeah. There's a lot of art bundled in this film. I love the idea of a twisted respect for her, and she she didn't learn her lesson, she learned how to be better at it. That's I think that's really awesome. In its own way. I mean, of course it's reprehensible and morally bad, but
Right.
no, you're right. It's you kind of have to have a twisted respect that she learned the wrong lesson.
Right.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, or at least some version of them. And for you, it is, what is your favorite true crime, or what is your favorite character study film?
Wow. I would have to say, it's a toss up between Helter Skelter and Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. I just remember seeing Helter Skelter as a kid on TV and, being wow. and then, and then Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, I saw at the theater as even, kid, and just it seemed like it was right there happening. And it was really, one of
Yeah.
those things. And that's something about not only true crime, but, even a documentary kind of feel to a film where you're like, you feel this is happening right now. I mean, and still, if you put Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer in and watch it, it's like it was made yesterday. I mean, it stands up not only in its style and its, punch, but knowing that it actually happened is really even more terrifying. And then you start reading to, I saw a thing the other day, Otis Toole was, responsible, or they feel responsible for Adam Walsh disappearance and murder and whatever. So there's certain things
Oh,
that you're like, oh my God, that hits every time you see,
yeah.
his dad doing those commercials now. That it always sparks back into my mind, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. His partner was Otis Toole, and then it
Yeah.
leads you down this rabbit hole of now I want to learn more about Adam Walsh and disappearing in that store, and all these things that you're like, it's just intriguing to no end. And that's what's really fascinating about true crime, knowing that it not only did it happen, but it could happen again, and it could happen to your friends, it could happen to you, it could, there's certain things that it just brings an awareness that I think, like seeing Exorcist 3 is great and it's an amazing film, but something with true crime is just more, it hits a little more home because it actually happened. And that to
Oh,
me is what's exciting, and what's exciting about making them and giving the
yeah.
opportunity to make them is something thrilling, because you get dive into each of these characters or these monsters, and you find out something that sometimes you can't believe it happened. And it's exciting, and I'm appreciative that I've got the opportunity to make them.
Yeah, it's almost scarier when it really happened. So I have to ask, what is your favorite horror movie of all time? And you can name more than one. That's a tough question.
Well, that is a tough one. I would say Zader and House of Laughing
Ooh.
Windows by Pupi Avati, an Italian director who's just so unsung. I mean, he's just those two films are phenomenal. And Anything and Everything, by Mario Bava. I mean, I'm huge on
Yeah.
the style of the color, and knowing that he did all this stuff on a limited budget, and with just nothing but tenfold of talent. I mean, it's that's what's more inspiring to me than huge budgets or anything of that. It's kind of even Ed Wood stuff. I'm hugely a fan of the underdog that gets these films made and gets them released and finds an audience. And to me, that's more amazing than any Michael Bay film or whatever it would be. Not that there's anything wrong with his stuff, but if you've got limited resources and you're still able to tell a story, whether it's a good, bad, or whatever, and it gets out there and it finds an audience, that to me gains tons of respect.
I love that answer, and I totally agree. We're here to support independent horror. We're here to lift up these voices that don't have all the resources, but are still telling good stories and making good art. And as a fellow Italian film junkie, I have not heard of those first two films. And that's why I
Oh,
ask this question, because it's always adds something to
oh,
my to be
check them
watch
out
list. I'm
immediately. They're
so big.
amazing. They're amazing.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So, where can people see the film? It's coming out November 4th.
Yes, it's playing here in Los Angeles on Halloween for a week at the Lemley's Glendale, and it's playing on the 28th actually in Lemley's Santa Monica, cast and crew screening, and anyone out there who's in the area is welcome to swing by and check it out. And then yes, November 4th it starts streaming and VOD and all that good stuff, and then a physical release probably later in the year.
Well, I will be adding it to my collection. I support physical media. If you're out there,
Oh,
you never know when these things go away.
yes.
Get the Blu-ray, get the DVD. Um, awesome. What are you working on next? I know you mentioned a little bit of a preview, but what do you got next?
Well, I just finished the locked picture on Sunset Strip Killers, which is based on Carol Bundy and Doug Clark, who are two. I guess it's kind of a 9.5 weeks true crime film where they, kind of met, fell in love in 1980, and then went on a killing spree of about 8 prostitutes. So that film we finished shooting this year, and I just locked picture on the edit. And now it's getting music and color correction and all that good stuff, and hopefully it'll release by the end of the year, by early next year. And then
Nice.
in February we're shooting the Devil's Disciple, the Night Stalker, on Richard Ramirez.
I'm loving this series, and you have Ed Kemper that came before Dorothea. So check all of these out, any of these out. They're, as far as I can say, having seen what I've seen, solid horror films, but also give you something to chew on and research if you're like me and love firing up the Google machine. Where can people find you on social media if they want to stay up to date on the things that you're up to?
I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just type in my name and you'll find me.
All right, links to those will be in the description as well. Chad, this has been a blast. I have such a fondness for your take on horror, your run and gun style, your love of indie horror, and honestly, we're united in our love of Italian horror. I can't thank you enough for joining me.
Oh well, thank you, and let's do it again.